Speaker, and on that point, as we are not allowed to have points of order at this time, may I just say to you that there have been a statement and an urgent question in the last week on the dismantling of DFID, neither of which, for slightly different reasons, was I able to contribute to under the current rules of the House. And I would, through you, Madam Deputy Speaker, hope that Mr. Speaker might keep these rules under a strict review and perhaps introduce some discretion, maybe, if they are to persist in their current form for very much longer. Having said that, Madam Deputy Speaker, can I thank you for allowing me to contribute to this debate. I want to draw the House's attention to my interests, which are laid out in the register, including that I'm a strategic advisor to the African Development Bank, something I do for the sum of £1 a year in order that there should be a contract. But the House will no doubt differ on whether the bank get value for money for that or not. Madam Deputy Speaker, the bank in recent years has been massively reformed. First of all, by Donald Kaberuka, the former finance minister from Rwanda, highly respected, the first, I think, elected president of the bank. And those reforms have been continued by his successor, Dr. Akin Adesina, whom I advise, and who I think will shortly be elected for a second term. And during that time, the bank has made huge progress set out by both front benches this morning. And what I want to do is just to add a little bit of colour to the comments that have been made already, and explain why I think this is such good expenditure and why the UK is absolutely right to focus on the African Development Bank and building it up and helping it to be ever more effective. The Minister mentioned the basic programme of the bank, and it's encapsulated in the high fives, which are, first of all, lighting up Africa, secondly, feeding Africa, thirdly, industrialising Africa, fourthly, integrating Africa, something which the Department for International Development has been extremely good at advising on across the continent, where time spent at borders is a massive disruption of trade, and Britain has been good at addressing that, and then finally improving the quality of life of African people. And the results over the last 5 years of President Adesina's time have been spectacular. If you take them all together, 18 million more people have had access to electricity, 141 million more people have access to better farming techniques, food security and advice, 13 million access to finance from the private sector investment programs, 101 million people have had access to better transport, partly for the reasons which I described, and 60 million have access to water and sanitation. We know that in our world today, nearly 2 billion people do not have access to clean water, with the dire effects of that. And the direct impact of the bank on the lives of 1/3 billion Africans over that period is very clear. There's been a higher rate of progress than at any time since the bank was established in 1964. And, of course, the bank has retained its AAA status from all 5 global rating agencies, thus maintaining financial probity as well. Today, the announcements that the Minister has made will ensure that the UK is able to help with the expanding capital base of the bank to accelerate all of these objectives, and that's the reason for the 125% increase in its capital. And once this money has landed in the African Development Bank, we will see those 5 key endeavours continue to be built on. 105 million more people will get access to electricity, 204 million people will be able to benefit from better farming technology, 23 million people will benefit from investments in private sector companies, 252 million people will gain access to improved transport and integration, and 128 million to improved water and sanitation. And these are very important changes to the quality of life of some of the poorest people in the world, and the bank directly helps support these low-income countries. Now, in addition to that, Madam Deputy Speaker, the bank has shown a very strong leadership response to the coronavirus crisis, managing to get together $10 billion to help African countries with its support, $3 billion to fight COVID-19, through a social bond on the global capital markets. That is the largest ever US dollar-denominated social bond listed on the London Stock Exchange, underlining the way in which development links in some of these great British institutions which are not immediately seen as part of international development, and it is now oversubscribed, indeed, by $4.6 billion. And the Fight COVID Fund and the other funds that they have managed to bring together will be a huge boost to help private companies survive after the crisis is over, and in particular pharmaceutical companies, which I know the bank are intending to do everything they can to assist for very obvious reasons. If I may just mention 2 or 3 other matters. The bank in the last year has set up the Desert to Power initiative, which will ensure that there are 10,000 megawatts of solar power across 11 countries in the Sahel, that belt of middle Africa. And this will result in electricity for 250 million of the poorest people in the world, and 90 million of them are, of course, off-grid. It is a $20 billion investment. It will be the world's largest solar zone, and there has been very strong input from the United Kingdom, from specialists at DFID, expertise made available to help the bank in the very good relationship which exists between DFID and the bank in making all of this happen. The work on affirmative action for women in Africa is extremely important, and $3 billion now is available for financing women's businesses, the largest ever such initiative. And Publish What You Fund lists the African Development Bank as one of the 4 most transparent institutions out of 45 global institutions. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, the AFDB has been has had very strong support from the United Kingdom, as I have tried to set out. DFID has sent some of its cleverest and most effective officials to work in Abidjan to help build the bank up. We want the African Development Bank, rather than the World Bank, to be seen as the Africa Bank, which brings all of this together. And under the leadership both of Donald Kaberuka and Daki Nadesina, we are seeing that before our eyes. I hope the Minister will consider any way in which we might increase our shareholding in the bank, because our influence is much greater than the very small level of shareholding we have. And I think it would be helpful if having a continuous presence at the bank in Abidjan, rather than a rotating executive director role, that would be a good thing. Because of the way the bank is set up, that's not an easy ask, but I think that the bank would benefit from the expertise of having a British executive director there all the time. And finally, I hope that, just as we have with the World Bank, we will be able to see a much greater use within the African Development Bank of the trust fund structure. This enables Britain to put money into a particular project or a particular ask where we want the bank to have a really catalytic effect. And the trust fund mechanism is one which is now in common use elsewhere. And I think it will greatly benefit the bank and Britain's desire to drive forward these objectives if we were to be able to make greater use of the trust fund mechanism with the African Development Bank. But thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, very much for giving me this opportunity to address these points and to support what the front benches have said, and most important of all, to support this replenishment today, which I think will do nothing but good for the overall aims that Britain so clearly has to do something about these appalling discrepancies of opportunity and wealth which disfigure our world today.
Patricia Gibson.
Thank you.